People very often ask why we Jews who keep Shabbat don't use electricity, don't use the telephone, don't watch television. Surely, they say, that's so petty, that's so stupid. Surely that's not what the Almighty wants you to do. And I say, on the contrary, I think it is what God wants us to do. And it's more important and more relevant now than it ever was in the past. You see, people think that 3,000 years ago, to make fire was difficult, but it wasn't. It was very easy. People had metal containers in which there was slow-burning charcoal, and they carried these containers around. And rather like those of you who play golf, you know, when it gets cold, you have these hand warmers that contain charcoal and are kept warm in your pocket. And sometimes people use them to light cigarettes. But in those days, if you wanted a flame, all you did was take a straw, put it into the pot with the coals and the charcoal, blow on it, and you had a light as easy as that. When the Torah says, we want you to keep Shabbat because you were slaves in the land of Egypt and now you're free, or because the world was created in 6 days and there is a seventh day, what the Torah is saying is you can live a life dependent on society around you, in which case you're a kind of a slave to society. Or you can free yourself from society by at least 1 day in the week, living a totally different way, according to very different rules. And the advantage of that is that it gives you two kinds of experiences in life. The experience of society and the experience of God, and a God-like life. The Torah says two interesting things about Shabbat that add to the idea of not doing work. One of them is Lo teva'aru esh b'moshvotechem b'yom HaShabbat. Don't have fire, don't make fire burn, don't initiate fire in your homes on Shabbat. If you want to use fire, you have to prepare it beforehand. The other is Al yetzei ish mimkomo b'yom HaShabbat. A person shouldn't go traveling all over the place. He or she should stay at home with their families within their area on Shabbat. Why are these things so important? In the society in which we live, we have become totally dependent on electricity. If there'd be a power cut, we wouldn't be able to manage all the things that make our lives comfortable. Heating, air conditioning, our fridges and our freezers would come to an end. We wouldn't be able to watch television. We'd be stuck in buildings without elevators. And similarly with cars, all the things in transport, public transport, we need to get around and to move around, to work and school and play. All these things are essentially part of our society, and we are dependent on them. Just as in the past they were dependent on fire, they needed fire for food and for industry and for arms and for everything. Fire was essential, so that when the Torah says don't burn fire on Shabbat and make Shabbat different to every day of the week, what the Torah is saying is don't be dependent. Don't be dependent on the things you are during the week. Relate to them differently on Shabbat. We now live in a world where we are dependent on cars, we're dependent on electricity, we're dependent on cell phones. I notice that people don't seem to be able to manage an hour without a cell phone, let alone a whole day. When we require entertainment, we need to be entertained by television and by our iPhones and by all these artificial means. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them. This is the world we live in. They bring us incredible knowledge and advantage that we have from technology, and they make our lives livable. But just as in the past we were told not to be dependent on Egyptian society, so now we are told don't be dependent on the secular society around you. You can manage without these things for 25 hours. And instead of the telephone and the television, you can have a conversation. You can learn how to develop relationships. You can go for walks. You can interact on a personal level instead of via Facebook and all the modern ways that enable you to communicate, but on many levels you don't communicate. And parents have time to be with their children instead of travelling around, travelling from home to work or to the shops or to the hairdressers or to whatever it is. This is an opportunity for families to come together. The tragedy is that the very thing the Torah warned us about, not to become dependent on man-made society, by making sure we have time for a God-like society, we have fallen into the trap. We are more dependent than we ever were, and people can manage even less without these artificial props. What Shabbat is giving us is an opportunity for 25 hours to live a different kind of life, a life in which we depend on our resources, on our inner resources, and not on the artificiality of society outside.